So last night, a client asked me a really good question that actually no one's ever actually asked before. And I think it's a very important question, and I wanted to share that with you. So she asked, what does it feel like to become more integrated, right? Because she was sharing with me, all the experiences that she has that makes her know or helps her to know that she's not integrated. And, we've all maybe been there. I've certainly been there. That sense of not really knowing who I am, and feeling that I'm an adult, I'm way into adulthood. Why is it that I don't have a solid sense of who I am apart from how other people reflect me, right, through their eyes? And that sense of maybe still being worried often about what people think about me, about what I say or do, and so the different things that many of us are familiar with that tell us that we're not yet securely rooted in our identity, right? So what about the flip side? What does it feel like to become integrated? So of course, I told her first, I am far from being fully integrated myself. I don't actually believe that anybody can really get completely integrated in this lifetime. That's not the goal. The goal is not like complete healing or complete integration. But oftentimes we have to be on the journey for some time before we realize that that's not the goal. It's the journey and the engagement with God on the journey, and it does make a difference. It's just that it takes time. All right. So when I thought about how to answer her, the first word that came to mind was solid. Okay, like SOLID, solid, and as in solid versus hollow, right? You can have right now I have here a cup and it's hollow, so it can be filled with things, right? But when it's empty, well, it's empty, right? It's hollow. But something else that isn't empty inside, it feels solid. And we know the difference when we are holding an object, right? The solid object, if it's made of the same material, has more heft, right? It can be used as a paperweight. It's grounded. Something that's very hollow, it's lighter, it's more easily toppled unless you fill it up, right? So I didn't even, I think in the past, know that I felt hollow. Like that wasn't necessarily a word that would come to my mind until a point when something shifted, and instinctively when I was searching for the word to describe what this change was, the change was somehow that I felt more solid, right? It wasn't just that I felt a little bit more whole, what does it feel like to be more whole? It's still, we still don't know what's the experiential experience, right? The experiential feeling of becoming more whole. But I realized the difference I had was there was this hole in me. Now I'm talking about HOLE, right? Hollowness that seems to be filling up. I feel a little bit more solid, a little bit more grounded, a little bit more stable, a little bit more secure. So all those words that you can associate with being anchored, being grounded, being rooted in the ground, being stable, being held, as opposed to light and unstable or easily uprooted. So that's one thing, right? Just the word feeling more solid. And how does that translate to the day-to-day living? I was sharing with my client that my experience as I was getting more integrated was not necessarily that I get less triggered. Sometimes it's true that what used to trigger me in the past, now it's not that big a deal anymore. That's one of the signs of growth, of getting more integrated. But the bigger difference is not about being less triggered, because, the wounds are still there. Or there are other wounds that maybe haven't been dealt with and they can still get triggered. A very big difference that I find myself observing about myself is the way I respond when I'm triggered. Now I'm I know how to accompany myself. I'm not so lost as before. In the moment, I still feel like a lost kid. I mean, usually it's a younger part of myself that gets triggered, right? In moments, by a situation or by a person. And then all that very raw, overwhelming emotion that maybe I must have felt in the past when I was a child, they come to the surface. And even as an adult, I feel that fear, I feel that fright or that anxiety, sometimes even that panic, that overwhelm. But one, I know now how to wait till it passes, or I know what to do, not to panic about panicking, or not to panic about that kind of fear coming up. I know how to, it's like the adult in me knows how to be patient and let the emotions continue to surface and to be able to sit with it, and not just sit with it, to know how to regulate my own emotions. Not perfectly. I'm still really wanting to learn better techniques and methods on how to help myself regulate my emotions when I get dysregulated, when I get really triggered and upset and angry. But there is that space now that wasn't there before. And that space continues to grow. The strength continues to grow. The knowledge and experience and wisdom on how to handle myself when I get upset or triggered, or my insecurities get triggered, that is evolving. And so it's not that there's no discomfort anymore. But when these difficult moments come, I can feel within myself more resources, right? So it is part of that feeling of becoming more solid. I'm not as helpless. And the way that I respond to, being triggered in the same situations that, can maybe really make me feel really overwhelmed in the past, the way that I can respond now, even though it's still very challenging, even though often it still feels like it takes every ounce of courage for me to be able to show up, to be honest and authentic, to be vulnerable, or to stand up for myself. The difference is now I can stand up for myself. In the past, I couldn't. The difference is now I know how to draw a boundary. I know how to be vulnerable, to what extent. Like, I know when to be vulnerable. I know when to draw a line. In the past, I didn't know all that. It's just, the mind just goes blank, when I'm triggered, right? But now I know. And even though inside me, my body is still in fight or flight response, in the moment, I can feel my heart rate increasing. I know I'm hardly breathing. My breathing is really shallow. All those signs are still telling me that I am in distress, right? But yet, I can respond with a lot more grace in the moment, even in distress. So that's how I have experienced the change as I become more integrated. Okay, as more healing happens. And that, I think that's something really worth working for, don't you? I mean, when I started this journey, I just wanted to be healed. I just didn't want to be triggered anymore. I just didn't want life to be difficult anymore. I wish everybody would change. I wish my family would change, or, whoever it was, whatever situations it was that would make me just feel really overwhelmed. I always wish that, that just disappears, or that I will get completely well so that this kind of thing won't happen anymore. And I realized, well, again and again, the Lord tells me that's not the point. And He didn't come, and He didn't create me to live a life of complete ease, without challenges, without suffering. Ultimately, the point is to lead me deeper into the mystery of life, into the mystery of love, which is Him, and a big part of becoming more integrated and healed is taking up our cross in a way that we probably never would have thought of before. It takes great willingness to suffer, okay? But not to suffer unnecessary kind of suffering, which often we allow ourselves to go through because we add to our own suffering by being, very, by angsting even more and more about what people are thinking of us. That makes us even suffer even more unnecessarily. But the process towards integration requires suffering, because it requires us to confront and not in an aggressive way, but to be able to look in the eye, our own self, and acknowledge what we've been running away from, and to trust that God is there to receive us, and that He will show us how to become more human. He's the one that's calling us to be more human. Christ is calling us forth. He's raising the dead, the dead that's in us, that the parts of us that have been fragmented, have been exiled and all gone different places. He's calling them home, one part by one part. And it takes our whole lives, I believe. And He's raising the parts that have been long dead or long dormant. He's waking them up. And none of that feels easy. None of that, really none of that is easy. But it's the only way to be alive. And if we desire life enough, we will be more than willing to keep saying yes, to do what it takes, to make this journey. So I hope that this little description about the experience of becoming more integrated will be helpful to you. Those of you who are curious or wanting, feeling that you want to grow in integration, but you also wonder, but what does it feel like when I become more integrated? How would I know that I'm growing in integration? Well, what I described is, I'm sure, not exhaustive, but, I think those are markers that you can look for.